Just to remind you once again on our conversation this morning, religion and governance. And of course, joining us also in studio is Dr. Nelson Makanda, General Secretary of Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. A very good morning to you. Good to see you and welcome to the program. And before we get into the conversation, I would like us to just listen into something that happened earlier in the week that perhaps has prompted us to actually have this conversation. And of course, which will be setting pace to us having a discussion on really the place of religious institutions in this country and in terms of politics and governance as well. Let's listen in.
The Church is deeply concerned and acknowledges the heavy burden placed upon the shoulders of ordinary Kenyans by the ever-increasing cost of living. This predicament has been further exacerbated by the persistent weakening of the Kenya shilling, the introduction of new taxes through the Finance Act of 2023, and the daunting challenges presented by the global economic landscape. While we acknowledge the influence of global factors, we firmly believe that the government holds a moral obligation to cushion its citizens from the harsh realities of the high cost of living. As much as we appreciate our sovereignty as a nation, with all its myriad of issues notwithstanding, we are bound to take a critical step to evaluate the performance of the government for the last 1 year vis-à-vis the promises made to the people of Kenya during the electioneering period. Our honest observation as a church is that there is more of rhetoric and excuses than conscious efforts to take practical implementation. We urge the government to go beyond promises and lip service and embrace practical programs to alleviate sufferings of Kenyans. In conclusion, it is possible for us to collectively engage in change that will be beneficial to all of us, but the government has the responsibility to lead the way forward. To this end, we humbly beseech the government and all relevant stakeholders to engage in open, constructive dialogue and expedite comprehensive action to address these critical issues.
Hata tukikosoana, sababu tunawaheshimu viongozi wetu wa kanisa. Ole sapit, usiwe na matusi, sababu kusema serikali ni rhetoric na huhesabu ile kazi inafanyika. Na tunajua wewe hauwezi kuona sababu una kiongozi wako unayemuona. Ole sapit, aseme, asiseme, tunajua msimamo wake uko wapi. Kwa hivyo tunataka tuambie Ole sapit, tunakuheshimu, but please don't be blind to the reality of our country today.
And that certainly brings us to the conversation of that intersection between faith, politics, and governance in this country. So, have the religious institutions overstepped their mandate when they speak on issues of national matters in this country? Let me begin with Bishop Dr. Okenda. I mean, when you look at that, I mean, that exchange there, it's not really an exchange, but it was a reaction to the remarks that was made by the ACK Archbishop. What do you make of it?
Well, thank you, Zainab. I want to begin by saying that it is a little bit unfortunate when the top leadership begin to fight in the public, because the picture that we are painting is not the best picture. But this brings me to begin to think on how both politicians and religious leaders are knitted together in the building of a nation. Mm-hmm. We could all agree that these two authorities are given by God. It is God who builds his church, and this is well inscripted in the book of Matthew 16:18, when God himself through his son said, "And I will build my church." But also in Romans, the government institutions are put there by God. It is God who gives authority for those who are to lead us. And I believe that we need to come to a place that we respect each other by listening to each other and not fighting each other. In fact, the church, and I will talk on behalf of the church, is given a very strong mandate on what to do in terms of correction. And this, for those who are listening to me, we could check this in the book of 2 Timothy, whereby Paul instructs Timothy and tells him that correct, rebuke, and as you do that, use all patience as you do that. So the church is mandated to really talk against the ills of a nation, because the role of the church is to make sure that people live in godliness in a way that they will be answerable and responsible to each other in the building of a nation. That role is given to the church. And remember, Zainab, also, all the people you see in this country, they fall into the religious circles of this country. Muslims, Hindus, and Christians. They all belong, and therefore they are also subjected to the leadership of those that are in these religious institutions. So when the religious leaders speak, I don't think it is prudent to really classify them to any angle, because at the end of the day, they are building the same country.
All right. And we'll continue with that. We'll delve much deeper into that. Engineer Surendra, your quick thoughts as well, just initial thoughts on that. It's not the first time we've had of such statements being made that, the religious institutions, the church should just stick to a certain mandate, really. What is your thought on that?
Slightly different from what my brother has said at the present moment. We firmly believe that every person has a definitive role to play in the progress of the society. I just take an example. For this society to build itself up, progress and develop, there are different institutions who have different roles. The police has a definitive role, the army has a definitive role, the scientists have a definitive role, the teachers have a definitive role. Similarly, in leadership, there are different categories of leaders. We have the political leaders, we have the governance leaders, we have the religious leaders, we have the social leaders, and many other types of leaders which are there. And each one of them has a definitive purpose to play. The political leaders are concerned with the governance of the country. The religious leaders are supposed to be building up the nation, the character of the nation, the character of the people, and strengthening the society. So we have a definitive role to play as far as the people are concerned, to build up a strong character in the people. And we should limit our responsibility to what is our real mandate. Should we then not speak on matters of concern to the people of our country? Yes, we should. We should highlight those, but we must not jump into the process and try to complicate an already difficult situation which is there on the ground.
Okay. And Dr. Nelson Makanda, I'll get to you in a moment, but we have to take a break. So when we come back from the break, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and whether you agree or disagree with some of those sentiments, and of course your thoughts on whether the political leaders in this country respect the opinion of the church when it comes to their sentiments on what's happening in the country. All right, so let's take that quick break. The hashtag is MLiveNTV. Talk to us. We're going to be back in a very short while. All right, right, welcome back to the program. You're watching AM Live this morning. Once again, I'm with Bishop Dr. John Okinda, the Vice Chair of the National Council of Churches of Kenya, Surendra Bhatia, who is the National General Secretary, Hindu Council of Kenya, as well as Dr. Nelson Makanda, the General Secretary, Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. This morning, the Chair of the Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, Hassan Olenado, could not join us for this conversation. However, we will still continue to take a look at really the nexus between the religious institutions in this country and the nexus between them and politics and governance, and of course their place in terms of speaking out on issues of national matters in this country. Dr. Makanda, now following some of those remarks we've seen from, we saw from the majority leader in the National Assembly addressing some of the statements made by the ACK Archbishop, it appears the politicians say that when the church speaks on such matters, it is a skewed criticism of the government, and that, that it should, remain by speaking on perhaps matters of just divine issues. I don't know what your take on that is.
Allow me to weigh in and say that one is that religious leaders have no need to antagonize government. It is not in the making of religious leaders to be antagonistic, and so I do not subscribe, or the Christian faith does not subscribe to the fact that we should be antagonistic, as it were. However, having said that, is that a God in his mind sets out to create nations and authority. From our from our view and from where we stand as Christians, God calls out Abraham and tells Abraham, go to the land that I will show you, and in that land I will make you a great nation. And God begins to create a great nation out of this one man. And in his mind, there are about 4 or 5 things that he's looking at when we begin to look at how nations should function. One, it's about land, and land is about the economy. Because Israel is given land as a place where they will make wealth from, land flowing with milk and honey. And so land is important. The economy is important in the mind of God. And so when the economy is being constructed, God is not out of it. He is in it. Number 2 is the people. The people, I will give you a great nation, meaning people. Nations are not made out of, they are not virtual. They are on land, and they are not made where there are no people. That intersection is extremely important, so that then whatever that happens in a nation should be for the welfare of the people, should be for the good of the people. Then he proceeds and says, I'll give you a law in that land. The law creates a culture, how people will relate with each other, how resources will be utilized, how the economy will be shared equitably amongst the people. And number 4, says, I'll give you a king in that land. In other words, leadership. And it's the leaders who are meant to ensure that the law is being followed, the law is just, the law is protecting the weak, and that there is equity in the sharing of the resources of the land, and the welfare of the people is taken care of. But as they are doing this, they're supposed to honor God. And so the religious leader remains central in that dynamics. And so there's no separation between this perceived separation between what is secular and sacred. God did not create a secular world and a sacred world. And so the religious leader in this space, a Christian leader in this space, he speaks and addresses things that affect humanity in its totality. It will be about marriage, it will be about education, it will be about food, it will be about inheritance, it will be about money, it will be about leadership. And so the religious leaders are in order when they speak on matters governance and matters that hurt and affect the country. And so in the discussion that we have just seen, that you have highlighted, that was a rhetoric that was here a few years ago, about 20 some years ago, in the situation where religious leaders stay there, let us stay here. People come to us, we provide education as religious leaders. We provide health care in this country. 69% of schools are owned by the religious leaders in churches, institutions in this country. Health care, more than 40% is provided by religious institutions.
So is it unfair to say that the religious leaders are engaging in politics when they call out the administration on issues of cost of living, for
example? It is unfair. It is extremely unfair. I do not think that religious leaders mean ill for this country. They mean good for this nation. And religious leaders are not blind to the fact that we are facing a difficult economy. And perhaps it's a global issue. I mean, the cost of living has risen not just here, it's risen out there. I was traveling last week and noticed that a litre of petrol in UK is about 280 shillings, 1.55 pounds for a litre of petrol. So it's a global issue. But however, it's appreciable that when religious leaders seek to engage and to provide advice that is carefully thought about, because I do not think that His Grace, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church, is a reckless speaker. He was on the bashing end the other day for praying at Bomas when the results were being announced. And all our religious leaders were lined up there, and he speaked upon to pray. I mean, the other side was bashing him and saying he prayed to bless an election that they didn't think was right when the results were being announced. So, and you realize that he's getting bashing from both sides. He is not biased whatsoever. In the statement that has been issued, if you listen to him, he's actually saying, we kindly plead with the government to think about the plight of Kenyans. And if religious leaders cannot speak about people who cannot afford food, who cannot afford their children to go to school, who cannot afford to pay medical bills, who will? I mean, if religious leaders do not take up that responsibility to speak for them, who will?
All right.
Yeah.
And I mean, Bishop, we've seen the involvement of religious leaders and religious institutions in the country's governance from the time during the push for multi-party democracy, when we're talking about the issue of the constitution. So really, does it mean that you can confine the church to just matters of, divine issues and not what really happens outside the doors of, the church?
Thank you. This will be impossible to confine the church to only spiritual matters, because the church and religious leaders serve humanity, serve communities, who keeps on coming to them every week for spiritual matters, but also for morality, and all these matters that makes people be real people who can live in a community. And therefore, it is unethical, from where I stand, to really confine religious leaders to only one aspect of life. You see, religious leaders work basically again in the spiritual, but the spiritual must be exercised outwardly. Because as you are transformed inwardly, that need to be seen outwardly. So what we are doing as religious leaders is both spiritual and physically. And as Dr. Makanda had put it rightly, we've been involved into the plight of humanity in matters education, matters health, matters justice, matters food, shelter, and all these basic needs that falls squarely to humanity. We've done this because this falls squarely in our mandate. And I believe that all religions ascribe to this transformation of people. The government creates an atmosphere for people to live peacefully, offering security, laws that can govern humanity, but also bringing infrastructure that will help this humanity to run about their duties on a day-to-day basis. If you look at that, you will agree with me that we are all serving humanity in the same way, but at different levels and at different times. And therefore, we supplement and complement each other in matters, making sure that livelihoods are better in the people that we serve, both in the churches and also the government.
So let me ask you, where do you think the problem lies when it comes to the stance that religious leaders make? In a reality situation right now is the fact that the politics in this country is quite divisive at this point. So when religious leaders speak on issues that touch on politics and governance and national matters, are they an easy punching bag?
It seems that the religious leaders becomes the easy punching bag at one point, but it should not be the case. I want to look at it this way. The mandate that is given, and I said it in my opening remarks, that the religious leaders have a role to really speak in the lives of people. In fact, to those that ascribe to the Bible, in the book of Matthew chapter 5, the Christians are supposed to serve as light and salt of the earth. They need to bring transformation that is practical, that people can see. And this affects all. The people that we speak to, we want them to demonstrate a character that people can see, that people can emulate, but also they need to do things that can be able to transform lives. So this happens to those that are led and those that are leading. And in one quarter, those that are led and those that are leading, they are part of this great community. In Kenya, we call this is our nation. So we all come together in one basket to make sure that livelihoods are taken care of in whichever way that we can. Because at the end of the day, we live for each other. There is no one who goes to a different supermarket and a different market. We all meet in these areas together. And as communities, when we suffer together. We feel the pinch of the pains that we go through as a nation. If this hospital has no medicine, it affects everybody. And therefore, when we speak, we are not just speaking to fight the state or to fight those that are in authority, but we are doing this so that we can come into the middle ground and say, hey, how do we help the people that we are leading? The religious leaders are leaders in their circles, the same as political leaders. And therefore, even when we talk of governance, the governance goes with structures. So we look at the structures, and sometimes people forget what is expected in their structures, and then they begin to lead outside the structures. So we would want the structures to be followed to, adhered to, so that those structures will guide us to live in harmony and be able to achieve the objective by which they were created and put in place. And with those sculptures, you understand that those regulations and laws that we put there are to be taken care of by leaders. So we want these leaders to be also accountable, so that they can be able to protect the structures that are put there, because those structures are to be driven by people. And these people are the leaders. So the church comes in to talk about governance, because the church would want to see that the regulations and the structure are kept, but also the people who are spearheading them are doing them according to the law. And we keep on reminding each other because nobody can be left unreminded in these matters.
And I mean, so the church has that place in terms of calling out the administration and speaking truth to power, indeed, Engineer Surendra. But then there has been this whole conversation and a lot of accusations that has also been labeled against the religious leaders and institutions in this country for being used as a tool for, political gain.
I would like to make a very fine distinction between raising the issues which concern our people and actually participating in the process. These are two different things. Raising issues, yes, it's our moral duty to raise issues which affect our people. But then participating in the process of governance is something which I mentioned is we as religious leaders must think twice about.
But where do you create that distinction between saying we are going to talk about it, but in terms of acting upon it or participating, that is where we draw the line?
The answer to that question is that, instead of us getting involved in the governance of the issue, would it be better for us to strengthen the institutions which have the first responsibility to ensure that the governance is as per the laid out procedure in the Constitution? Now, our Constitution in Kenya is one of the finest in the world. We have checks, balances, we have got institutions who are supposed to do their job and ensure that the governance of the country is taking place in the best interest of the people of Kenya. We are raising issues. Inflation, for example, and the affordability is definitely an issue for our people. They are actually going through a very tough time. But what we need to do is to strengthen the institutions who will help us solve this problem, rather than get involved in the problem and complicate the situation a little more. To be more specific to your question, how do we draw the line? We raise the issues and we allow the institutions, we engage with the institutions to take that process forward and solve the problem for us.
But I feel like that's exactly what we have seen happen when religious, leaders come out to speak on these ills and they come out to give a statement on the state of the nation. It's just to speak on these particular matters and not necessarily involve themselves in terms of the implementation of, policies and things like that.
Absolutely correct. That's why, speaking is not the issue. It's getting involved, which is the issue. And I think what you just mentioned a little while ago was the accusation that the religious leaders were getting involved in the governance of the country. So if you can see what has happened, we've just discussed that incident. It was speaking out on the issue, and it was not really to be misinterpreted as the religious leaders getting involved in the governance of the issue.
All right. Dr. Makanda, I'll go back to the same question that I'd asked earlier on to Engineer Surendra when it comes to this perception, this image, and especially when it comes to, our highly divisive politics spaces and during electioneering period, especially during the campaigns and all, that, religious leaders and institutions alike fall prey into the politics of politicians and are used as a tool for political gain?
Well, politicians look for numbers. And during elections, the easy numbers that are gather in religious institutions, places of worship, in mosques, in churches, and in temples. And so politicians get out there in disguise sometimes to try and instrumentalize religion for the sake of their success in the game of politics. And this is a global phenomenon. It's not an exclusive Kenyan issue.
Right.
I mean, the Republicans and Democrats in the US, you find religious competition happening.
Right.
around that. So this is not an exclusive Kenyan issue that we will begin to say that point out fingers at the Kenyan situation. But however, having said that, I think religious leaders...
Do you think it has hurt the trust within which the public has, or the public perception is there on the church and religious institutions and religious leaders?
The public, as we stand in this country, the only public advocate that is credible, that remains standing, is the religious leaders. The civil society is almost dead, is non-existent, if you like. The media is trying somewhere there. The only standing public advocate, and the public has to be appreciative of the fact that when elections happen, religious leaders and religious people do not give away their right to elect and to choose the leaders they need. But however, it is wrong for a religious community to be perceived or to be carried alongside and to be said that it's aligned to this group and not the other, because there is no homogeneous grouping, as it were, in terms of a political view. You will not say that Christians or Muslims or this denomination and that denomination has a total support of so and so, and so let's carry them to go in that line. But having said that, is to say that even though politicians try to instrumentalize religion during elections,
and even after elections,
right, religious leaders remain the only voice that will speak when no man is standing. When the Moi era was here and there was struggle for multi-party, when everybody else was not standing, it's religious leaders who helped this country to midwife the multi-party democracy. When everybody else was being put in and thrown into Nyayo House basement, and as it were, religious leaders remained sober, and there will be always a voice of God from the religious leaders.
There's always been this argument that the trust, the credibility, the integrity that the religious leaders and institutions back then had has changed over time, that it is not the same.
If it has changed, why are we having Archbishop Sapit? You have clips of Sapit being bashed by Azmio. You can produce those clips here. You have seen a clip of Kenya Kwanza bashing His Grace Archbishop. I mean, so where do you put him?
So nothing
you have
has
clips
changed.
in this year and this quarter. You find Opio and I throwing jabs at His Grace. You have seen Ichungwa, the majority leader, throwing jabs at him. So really, you cannot say that religious leaders are boxed, as it were. You have seen Bishop Muheria speaking out, and so just allow me to say that religious leaders stand for the good of the nation and stand for the good of the people. There will be situations when they will say things that politicians will feel are hurtful to them because they have made a choice not to play to the gallery and not to be silent. There will be moments when they will say things that will hurt the feelings of those who follow a certain affiliation. But that is the nature of this game. That is the nature of God. We rebuke, we comfort, we encourage, we strengthen. All the roles are ours. The Word of God and our functions are double-edged sword. Today, we comfort, but tomorrow we will rebuke. so that then we ensure that there's an alignment to what is right and to what is just. And we do this out of love. It is not out of malice. We do this out of a clear conscience, seeking what is good for our country. Look at Business Daily today. The front page of Business Daily, you are analyzing the papers today. Kenyans default 15% of the loans. It is there.
Right.
Yes, I mean, the CEOs are saying the cost of fuel and electricity, and this is a study by the Central Bank of Kenya, from the CEOs, the CEO category. I didn't know that there's an index for business, for CEOs. And the CEOs are saying the cost of electricity and fuel is hurting business and the spending power.
Yeah.
So as it were, there's nothing in that comment that is meant to hurt government.
And it's calling out the issues that bear in the society.
Yes, and I mean, Business Daily, you are speaking about it. It is here. So it doesn't really, for me, I see it as...
But when he speaks of, you know, political rhetoric in the country by the leaders of this country, that is what I think prompted the reaction from the political class as well. Perhaps if we can get that clip once again, and then maybe we can listen into it once again. That one that was, yes, let's get the first clip and then we come back.
The church is deeply concerned and acknowledges the heavy burden placed upon the shoulders of ordinary Kenyans by the ever-increasing cost of living. This predicament has been further exacerbated by the persistent weakening of the Kenya shilling, the introduction of new taxes through the Finance Act of 2023, and the daunting challenges presented by the global economic landscape. While we acknowledge the influence of global factors, we firmly believe that the government holds a moral obligation to cushion its citizens from the harsh realities of the high cost of living. In as much as we appreciate our sovereignty as a nation, with all its myriad of issues notwithstanding, we are bound to take a critical step to evaluate the performance of the government for the last 1 year vis-à-vis the promises made to the people of Kenya during the electioneering period. Our honest observation as a church is that there is more of rhetoric and excuses than conscious efforts to take practical implementation. We urge the government to go beyond promises and lip service and embrace practical programs to alleviate sufferings of Kenyans. In conclusion, it is possible for us to collectively engage in change that will be beneficial to all of us, but the government has the responsibility to lead the way forward. To this end, we humbly beseech the government and all relevant stakeholders to engage in open, constructive dialogue and expedite comprehensive action to address these critical issues.
All right, so there you've had it. You know, he speaks on the leaders, and he talks about the rhetoric, and he talks about lip service, and he talks about the fact that there is need to assess the promises that were made then, and of course the reality on the ground now, and of course critically looking at really, is the government doing its job? So is that interfering with the governance issues? Is it you know, that issue of what Engineer Surendra is saying, interfering and by literally participating in the process, or just calling out the issues?
I think it's just calling out the issues. For me, an appropriate response from the majority leader would be, we appreciate that there is pain, and as the religious leaders have said and have urged us, this is what the government is trying to do to deal with these situations.
All right.
The cost of living in terms of food, this is what we are doing. In terms of the cost of fuel, this is what we are doing. In terms of healthcare and education, this is what we are doing. I think that is the appropriate response to this statement.
Okay.
Because this statement is not antagonistic. I mean, you have raised that he mentions about a political rhetoric. He is basically, I do not stand for him, but basically just trying to say, assessing the promises that were made prior to the elections and to where we are, how are we doing as a nation? And let the majority leader or the politician stand up and say, this is how we are doing. This is how we are trying to help in the situation given the circumstances. And all of us will appreciate the fact that it's a painful season for Kenya and a painful season globally. We have appreciated the fact that the government has taken a position that we will not borrow more. So we will tax more to support government spending. I think that is fair enough. He has already stated that. But then it would be nice for there also to be a response that says, this is how we see things rolling out as a nation. Very soon, the cost of food is going to come down. The cost of electricity, we are doing this and this to help it come down.
So you expect a rational response from the
government? Yes, a rational response, not an antagonistic response.
All right.
I don't think that this is a fight.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Bishop, not a fight.
True. You look, thank you very much. You look at that script. There is a word that caught my attention as Archbishop Olesapit makes his remark. He said this: collectively, let us engage. Let's be open, constructive, as we bring the dialogue forward. You look at that appeal, it is appeal for all of us. He's not actually saying, we church, we have it right, you have it wrong. What he's saying, this is our nation. This is how we say it, but can we engage constructively?
All right.
So I was expecting that constructively engagement between both parties, that the state would say, Archbishop, in response to what you are saying, this is what we've done, this is what we're doing, and this is where we are taking the nation. Because this nation needs hope. From where we are at, with the things that are happening economically, this is the time that we need a lot of hope and not fight or defensive. We need to accept where things are hard because they're not created by Kenya. It's not this administration that has brought us where we are at. It is a situation that we found ourselves in. And because it is a corporate thing, it is our time now to call all our troops together and come up with a solution. And I wanted also to say that the church, as far as we are concerned, we are offering pastoral duty to all, those that are in government and those that are outside government. Our role is to pastor them. Our role is to give them direction. And we've rebuked both sides, we've corrected both sides, and we've encouraged both sides at times. So what we are doing is very neutral at this particular moment. There is a question I'd ask, maybe you'll go back to it and you say, could it be that there are things that had happened that had now caused us not to have the voice? We still have the voice, and Dr. had mentioned about it, but I also want to say that we still have the voice. But the ideal situation would be that when we come to the national election, like what we just came out from, we needed to be very neutral in the way that we handle the congregations.
Do you feel like the church was neutral? Do you feel like religious institutions were neutral in that space?
I say we need to.
We need to. So there's certainly some room to,
to improve.
I want you to hold on to that thought, and I'll come back to Engineer Surendra. We have to take a break. This is AMLiveNTV. The hashtag we're using is AMLiveNTV. Talk to us. We're going to be taking that short break. We'll be back in a very short while. All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching AM Live and TV, and of course, just looking at some of your feedback this morning. And as I get to Engineer Surendra, maybe perhaps we can start with this. So there's this comment that this whole issue with politics, donations, and the church is the issue that money donated by politicians has a huge impact on that relationship. So I'm asking, does, the acceptance of donations and cash to religious institutions compromise their ability to stand up to the political class?
Very interesting question. Just as a precursor, the Hindu Council of Kenya is a non-political, non-commercial organization, so we don't accept donations from the political class. Wherever there is money involved, there is the risk of your thought process being influenced by that. Now, is it actually happening? Very difficult for us to say from the outside. But then the risk is there that this may happen. And therefore, my take on the subject would be it will be difficult for us to comment whether it's happening, but then there is a probability it can happen. How do we solve that problem? Answer is very simple. Donations and political views are two separate things. Donations come in to strengthen the religious institutions. And by no way, we as religious leaders should take that as an incentive to modify our views. We are people of God. We have a definite path forward. And we should stick to the role which has been invested into us by the faith.
But that perception that by doing that, by accepting, yes, to help, these institutions, to incentivize these institutions, to grow these institutions, at the end of it all is a double-edged sword that it injures its credibility and legitimacy as well. So where do you balance that space?
We are the beholders of the faith and ethics for the people. We are the people who promote that. Now, if we ourselves falter on those two parameters, then questions will definitely be asked. How do we balance it? One easy way out is to say we will not accept donations from the political people. I think short term that might be a good way of balancing the integrity of the institutions, and saying that we will not do. The money might as well go directly to the charitable causes rather than them flowing through the religious institutions for those causes. At the end of the day, we are there to help the people. So ultimately, whatever donations comes will go into the activities which will help the people. So those projects might as well be handled directly. We must ensure that the reputation of the religious institutions, the integrity of the religious institutions is protected fully. My brother Makanda just mentioned that the religious institutions and the religious leaders are the last man standing. We already have had several institutions which have the social institutions, or the civil society is already a casualty. Now, if the religious institutions lose their integrity, who would be there to actually speak about the issues of the people with the kind and power which it requires to get the right attention? So we as religious leaders have a responsibility to ensure that we first protect the integrity of our institutions, no matter what is the cost.
Dr. Makanda, your thoughts on that particular matter, especially on this, the issue of politics, donations, and the church really has been a conversation from the time of the campaigns and all the way even after the election and back to, this, I don't know whether to call it a normal period or this development period of the country. That has still been a big issue that the church continues to face in terms of addressing its issues of, integrity and issues of legitimacy by the leadership of religious organizations.
I don't know, Zainab, whether we have moved on from the other issue. Allow me to make a comment there, then I will respond to your question.
Okay.
One is to say that it's appreciable that it's only 1 year since this new government took over. And it might be early in the day to judge and give a verdict of a pass or fail in terms of how they have handled the economy and in terms of how they're handling governance and everything else. But however, I mean, the Swahili people say, siku njema huonekana asubuhi. So there are indications that are pointers. And my other hat, you've invited me here as a religious leader, but I'm a student of economics. It's appreciable that the government is doing everything possible to ensure that they pull this country out of the debt trap. In the last quarter, ending July, Kenya serviced debt at 161 billion shillings. Money collected, tax revenue in that quarter was 159 billion. So you realize that we are actually straining as a nation in terms of servicing our debt. And so the decision that has been taken by this government, the previous year, debt to revenue was 59% of revenue. So the decisions that have been taken by this government to ensure that we deal with the issue of debt, I think is prudent. The decisions that have been made in the last 2 days to ensure that there's prudence in government, reduce foreign trips and spending, I think they should increase and say reduce trips, working trips to Naivasha and to Mombasa. Let people work from Nairobi so that then we reduce expenses. The decision to cut the budgets by 10%, I think for me, these are all indications that government is conscious that the economy is hurting, and perhaps a response to that speech by His Grace the Archbishop, and they are putting in measures. And I think for me, I can be able to say, as an economist and a student of economics, that actually some good things might happen out of the measures that have been taken by this government. And so let us give them time. Let us allow them space to be able to implement these measures and see at the end of the day what happens. Because cost of production for agriculture has gone down by the fact that the cost of fertilizer has been reduced. The only problem there is going to be the cost of fuel and electricity.
And I mean, this comes on the backdrop of an outcry from Kenyans across the country, the issue of VAT on fuel products. I mean, this is a big issue when you're looking at the Finance Act of this year that was passed against the will of many Kenyans who made submissions before, the parliamentary committee. Don't you feel that then the government is being a little bit ironical?
No, I don't think they're being ironical. I think they are making decisions that are hurtful, but hurtful in the short term. If you ask me, that decision is hurtful, but hurtful in the short term. I mentioned here that fuel, 1 litre of petrol in the UK is 1.55 pounds. That translates to about 280 shillings a litre of fuel. We are paying 200 shillings here for a litre of fuel. So I mean, compared globally, I do not think that this is just a Kenyan problem. It is a global problem that we are having. So I think for me, let Kenyans, yes, that is going to be hurting us, but it might hurt us in the short term. Let's work on our production so that then we secure our food security base. Once we have secured our food security base, let's now begin to think about the other things that we spend our monies on. But let's allow government to ensure that we are rescued from this debt trap. I mean, it is there. I mean, the nation reported about the spending on debt as at the end of July this year. More than what was collected was paid for debt service. So I think for me, the decision was hurtful, but I think it is the right direction we have taken as a nation. Reduce on debt, increase on revenue collection, reduce the cost of production of food in this country, and in the long run, we secure ourselves, we become masters of ourselves, but then deal with austerity measures within government. And the last 2 days, there have been pronouncements on austerity measures in government. I do hope that those austerity measures will be followed and that they will escalate those austerity measures. Let Parliament work from Parliament, not Naivasha. Let ministers and ministries and public servants work from their offices, because a meeting of 5 people, why do you take it to Naivasha? A meeting of 20 people, or even if 100, there's Kenya School of Government here in Kabete. So let's reduce on spending so that then we are able to cushion the Kenyan citizen who is hurting.
Okay.
Once that has happened, then we can say, let's introduce subsidies and measures that reduce the pain at the till.
So you feel the decisions that have been made so far by the government in terms of the taxes, in terms of the levies, in terms of really the direction it's taken to improve the economy of the country is in the best interest of Kenyans from where you stand?
To a greater extent, yes. I have a problem with the housing levy, but to a greater extent, as far as this is meant to ensure that we rescue Kenya from where other countries have gone with foreign debt, I think that is a good decision.
Okay.
On the overall.
All right.
Yes.
And we'll hear from Bishop and Surendra on the same. But very quickly as well, you didn't answer my question on the issue of donations to churches and the whole issue of it being seen as though it injures the legitimacy of the leadership of these religious institutions. Our
position at the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya is that gifts to God that are made in church must be kept private. Let the left hand not know what the right hand has given. So that then we are not stopping them from giving to God and making donations. But let those donations not be used as baits, as publicity or seeking celebrity status, that you are the better giver and the other person is not a good giver.
All right.
Jesus taught about it, and he sat and said the woman who gave a mite was a better giver because she gave out of the abundance of her heart than the rich man who came waving the money, a big money, amounts of money, and dropping it in the offertory box. And the lesson that we draw from there is that the church must restrain from publicizing, offering, and gifts that are made by individuals, either businessmen or politicians. All of us have come to church to worship God, and we give our money as an offering to God. Let that be silent between me and God, not a public affair.
All right.
That's our position
Which
about
is unfortunately
that. Yes.
what has been happening.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Bishop, so you can chime in on that as well, but also what Dr. Makanda had mentioned in terms of your views on the issue of the cost of living right now. Where is your stand on those particular matters? We did hear from the ACK Archbishop speaking on the issue of taxation as well.
Thank you. I'll go back to politics and donations first. And say that donations are matters of heart, done from the heart. But when it comes to the point of implementations, they should not be used to capture the goodwill of the people that are receiving the donations. Because generally they are done for God, and God is the rewarder. The pastors and the bishops who are receiving them are just but mediums. So that should not be used to influence anybody to take an action that they were not ready to take because of the finances. We would appeal that when donations are done, let it be done secretly so that they can attract the blessings of God, rather than make them publicly to influence the people to make decisions that they were not meant to make. That would be our take. In the cost of living, we as the National Council of Churches, we feel strongly that the fuel levy of additional fuel levy in percentage was a bad move because it has affected the common mwananchi who is running things using transportation, those that are using kerosene in their homes. Life is unbearable. And we've had people being interviewed. And these are the people that comes to our churches. I think this is the time that we need to also stand and defend them in this because it is a little bit too much. Can it be suspended for a time until we see how our economy will be growing and stabilizing rather than introduce it at this time? Because it brings a lot of pain to the majority by which we are serving. And that is our stand as the National Council of Churches. We appeal that the government need to reconsider that because of the negative effect that it's bringing to the Kenyans at this particular moment.
So these are concerns that you're listening to from the members of the churches that you represent.
That's very true. That's very true. It has escalated the livelihood to be to a point that the majority of the people that come to our churches cannot bear it. It is a little bit too much at this particular time that we've just come from a lot of difficulties, including the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we are recovering from so many things. We've not even recovered. Although it is good for the government because they will be able to do the things that they are supposed to do, but sometimes you don't sacrifice citizens to do what you want to do. Because at the end of the day, it's about the citizens, it's about the humanity, it's about the people. So if we can caution the people at this particular moment, that would be a godsend, according to where we stand.
Indeed.
Is there anything we can do differently so that we don't implement that because of its negative effect to the lives of the Kenyans and most of the congregations that come to our churches? They cry to us. They are telling us, how do we close our ears not to listen to them? I think when they speak, we should be the voice of reason. We should be the people who can stand in between them and the state, and they are crying.
All right. Engineer Surendra, your take on that as well?
So bringing in fiscal discipline is something which is very, very necessary for any country. And so the general direction which has been taken by the government to increase the revenues, reduce the expenditure, these are the steps in the correct direction. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's only when we free the resources from the non-productive expenditure that we can put it into a productive welfare scheme. So from that perspective, what the steps the government has taken are absolutely correct. At the micro level, at the macro level, 100% correct, but at the micro level, for example, the fuel levy. Now that is one tax which has got a multiplier effect. And when you have a multiplier effect, the pain of that measure is felt at multiple levels. And therefore, could we have done it differently? The question is, yes, probably we could have done it differently, but we must keep in mind that the more we dilute these policies, the longer will be the time which the country will take to come out of this debt trap and move on the path of development. So it's a dual-edged sword, as you have been saying. High pain now, faster we come out of the situation. We dilute that pain a little bit now, longer it will take for us to get out of the situation. But this is something which Kenya as a country, the fiscal discipline, the fiscal policies, the focus on the right areas is something which we needed and something which is good for the country and something which will ensure that we are on the correct path of development as we go forward.
Because, I mean, you have Kenyans who say, fine, you know, we've been told and we've heard even from the economic advisor to the president saying that it's a bitter pill that we have to take for us to be able to move away from that. But you have, you know, Kenyans who say that we can't, if we cannot even afford a meal in a day, this is certainly not a solution.
I agree completely with you. If it's going to take away the essentials, if the policy of reducing the debt is going to take away the basic food on the basic requirements which an ordinary Kenyan has, then there is a definite need for us to reassess that and see how we can balance the needs of the people versus the need of the country. So I agree completely with you that the policies
So
and the macro level are correct.
A reassessment of the policies the government has taken.
Yeah, at the micro level.
Okay.
At the macro level, I agree completely in the direction with which the financial discipline is going. But at the micro level, whether we increase the fuel tax or whether we increase something else or we collect revenue somewhere else, those are options which we have to consider.
All right. And Dr. Makanda, you know, as we wind up, because I see we're almost done with time, just your final remarks as we move forward and where we have or what we need to do to ensure that, you know, there is a balance in everything that we do from, you know, the religious perspective and, you know, religious institutions and leaders in this country and what they can be able to do and set a place in where, in a space where, you know, they can create a better environment for the country and that we don't have to see this back and forth that perhaps we've witnessed in recently.
The approach that the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya has taken is that we engage with government as much as we are able to engage with government directly as opposed in the press. So that then there's more consultation, more advice given at that level, and setting out to act in ways that are redemptive and supportive to the government. To that end, we have made decisions that will allow us to be able to be a voice for the Kenyan citizen, but also on the other side, preserving the integrity of the Kenyan faith in government, because the Kenyan citizenry, in terms of faith, a trust index, it is highest in the religious leaders, second media. And this is empirical study. It is not it's not here or there. It's empirical. The trust in Kenyan institutions, first is religious leaders, then two is media. And so what we say as religious leaders affects that trust of the people that we are commenting about. So we have made a decision that we will reduce on public commentary and engage more with government to give support where support is needed, make correction where corrections are needed, and put pressure where pressure is required. Engage the opposition in the same manner, engage them in a manner that we encourage them to do and say what is right, and where they need to be measured for the sake of the Republic, do the same with them.
All right.
So then we are carrying everybody together and allow space, because this government is just finishing their honeymoon.
So give them some space.
Give them some space
to
be able to implement the policies that they have promised Kenyans.
Okay.
And pray for them. They have a difficult duty and responsibility to govern a country that is that has more than enough democratic space. I mean, we are enjoying the space and still not reduce that democratic space and support the development of this country. And so we will pray with them and support them, and that is our position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Makanda. Just very quickly, Bishop, as well, perhaps less than a minute, your winding remarks.
Thank you. In my winding remarks, I would want to make a few statements here, which of course we've done earlier, but to say that both the church, politics of the day, we all deal with the human affairs. And therefore, it is time that we work together, we listen to each other, and be tolerant to each other in the matters that touches the nation, without classifying the church leaders into political inclinations. When we speak as a nation. And I want to assure all divided opinions in this country politically that the church is the voice of reason. and will remain to doing this when things are hard and when things are easy for the posterity of our nation. Because the church and politics, we all offer services. And because we offer services to the people, we pray that the government should offer those services, even as we offer our part and encourage people and give people hope.
All right.
We believe that we'll get out of this, but we are asking both parties to understand that we cannot always dispense our matters publicly.
All right.
There are times that we need to sit down and talk to the power when the power is looking straight to our eyes, as we do the same, because there they can be able also to defend themselves and tell us the plans which they have.
All right.
So we are praying that we will be able to create the atmosphere. But as I finish, those areas that the citizens are crying, we need to listen to the citizens.
Okay.
Because this nation is for all of us, those that are low and those that are high.
All right.
We remain committed to pray and guide this nation in the ways of God. We as NCCK, we are committed to walk the journey with all parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bishop. And finally, Engineer Surendra, your final remarks on this matter.
So, our final feel on the subject is that we as Hindu Council of Kenya would not only encourage our members, but would encourage every segment of the Kenyan community and the society to carry out their responsibility with utmost respect and utmost effort. I think we as a society, Kenya as a country, has got a lot of thought capital. And we can all sit down together and use that thought capital to ensure that the problems which are facing us are all resolved. We have the ability, we can do it, and we should do it.
Fantastic. And I appreciate it. Quite brief and to the point. Thank you. Bishop Dr. John Okinda, the Vice Chair of the National Council of Churches of Kenya, Surendra Bhatia, National General Secretary of the Hindu Council of Kenya, as well as Dr. Nelson Makanda, who's the General Secretary, Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. Thank you so much for coming in this morning and, of course, having a discourse around this particular matter as we continue to really touch base on what's happening in the country and especially on issues of the cost of living that affect all Kenyans, devoid of the status that you hold. But this is where we wind up on M Live. Your world is coming up shortly with Winnie Lubembe. Thank you for watching, and I see your feedback. Let's continue having that conversation online. The hashtag is MLiveNTV. My name is Zainab Ismail. Good morning.